blank piece of paper, a very small piece of paper, but blank nonetheless. And today I am going to be doing one of these kinds of shadowy felines that you see in my art occasionally. I'm going to show you how I go about doing it. Starting off with my sketch, got my mechanical pencil and I am working on, let's see, what is this? This is Moulin de Roy hot press watercolor paper, 300 pound. And I am drawing with a mechanical pencil very, very lightly. Because the painting itself is going to be defining this much more than the pencil lines do. I'm just doing a quick little sketch here of a seated cat. Keeping it quick because I want to move on to the painting aspect of this. All right, there we go now. Cat sketched. It's pretty light. I think you can see it there though. Proceeding now to painting. Painting time. I have here my mini palette with all my colors and a mixing dish. And I also have water over here in a little jar. And I'm going to be starting off using it's a size 0 round brush, but it is an older one. So you see that the tip is not quite super pointed any longer because this brush has seen better days. If I have a newer brush, you can see by comparison that has a very nice pointed tip to it. This one is pretty good still, but it's not that super sharp point that I like for fine rendering details. However, this brush is very good for other purposes still. Even though it's past its glory days, it still is very good for dry brushing. Now, just to show you what I'm talking about with dry brushing, I've talked about this in my other videos before, but briefly, in this case, I mean, there's different methods of using dry brush technique, and in this case, I'm going to be using it to do a very light shading. And so what I do is I take my color, in this case, neutral tint gray, and then I actually wipe off most of it from my brush. So you can see I've wiped a lot of it off onto that paper towel. And then I very lightly can then shade with this. Now, just to contrast it, I'm going to show you, oops, I splattered paint over there. I'm just going to show you what it looks like when I just do regular painting strokes. You see how dark and smooth that is by comparison to the dry brushing over here, which is, you see the little fine lines of the bristles of the brush, but it allows me to do this kind of velvety texture and blending out my colors. Now I really like it for my smoky, shadowy effects that I like to do in painting. So I'm going to bring back that painting again, show you some other portions of it. I use this technique over here too. And what I like to do is I build up lots of colors. So while it looks black, especially on a screen, in person this is actually made up of blues and reds and even a little bit of green, all mixed in with the grays. And so it gives you this very rich tone. Oh, I'm going to show you also with the cats. See, I did that with their heads and their front paws. And you can sort of see the little texture of the paintbrush strokes. And it actually gives it sort of this nice fur texture as well. That's the other benefit of using this technique in this particular situation. I'm going to start with Bloodstone. I'll rotate my wheel a little bit for you to see. This is Bloodstone. It is Daniel Smith Primatech pigment, but it is a gray. It is a neutral toned pigment in the gray area of the spectrum, but it is a much warmer gray than, for example, Payne's gray, which tends to be a bluish toned gray. I love using Bloodstone for a number of reasons. One is that when you use it with a lot of liquid, it granulates beautifully and it creates other textures, not the kind that I'm using today, but this beautiful, I don't even know how to describe it. It's very organic, the way pigments granulate, and I love using it all the time. Bloodstone, but granulating pigments in general. Now, I also love it for being a very dark, intense, and warm toned gray, as opposed to, like I said, Payne's gray, which is a very cool blue toned gray. And I'll use both of them in the same painting sometimes, and I'll alternate because they have their places. Sometimes you want a warmer neutral tone, and sometimes you want a cooler one, and sometimes you want straight up neutral, which is where neutral tint comes in. Appropriately named, very easy to remember them. So yeah, I have 3 grays in my palette. I have neutral tint, Payne's gray, and Bloodstone. Now you see I started off with the eyes and I sort of moved my brush around the perimeter of the eyes because I want to leave those as this sort of glowy white. And I just gradually and very gently do this dry brushing to build up where my smoky shadows go. And you have to be very patient with this because if you load up your brush with too much, then you can get an extra dark spot. And you want to try to keep things very even, or I want to keep things very even and smooth. So it's sort of a slow process. One of the other looks that this reminds me of, I was seeing some artists that were drawing, a lot of artists love to draw with ballpoint pens. It's fun for sketching with, especially on a slightly textured paper, because you get this, basically this look of the bristles kind of dancing across the surface of the paper, and you can build up a very gentle textured shading, which is beautiful. The only downside is that ballpoint pens typically are not going to be archival ink. So that's the sad part. But the great part about doing this with watercolors is you are not limited by what colors you can use. I get asked sometimes if my paintings are actually colored pencils. People think that I'm doing this shading with colored pencils, and it is not. It is watercolor painting done like this, the dry brush shading in some of the rendered areas. And the wonderful thing with watercolors is you are not limited by a specific colored pencil color. You have your entire palette at your disposal, and you can mix and create whatever colors you need that are not available straight from a tube. So it's this unlimited spectrum that is available to you. All right, so once I have the basic shape, oh, and one more thing. You notice how I started from the inside of this shadowed face area and moved to the outside instead of outlining the face and then moving in from there. And that's because I actually want to keep my outer edges very soft so that I don't have this hard edge to the exterior. But by keeping it soft like this, that adds to the smoky, shadowy feel of it, because I allow the boundaries to blend out into the surrounding, in this case white, but sometimes it might be the surrounding colors of the background of whatever this painting is of. In this case, I don't have any surrounding elements. Maybe I'll add something after. Although if you are going to have a background, I would highly suggest getting it into place before doing something like this, because once you touch a watered up brush on top of this, it will blend and smooth out the textury things, and you might lose some of this lovely velvety softness that it has. Okay, so once I have my base color, tone, and shape in, then I start to play with other colors in this darkness to make it more rich. In this case, I'm going to use a little bit of quinacridone red. Again, you see, I wipe off most of it from my brush, and I let the bristles splay out a little bit. I actually don't want it to be a sharp point. I want the tip to be spread out, because if it's just a single sharp point, then all I'm going to be, it's going to be taking a long time to do this. But when the bristles are spread out a little bit, fanned out like that, then it lets you cover more area quicker. Why can't I say the word right now? And then I'm also going to use some of my blues. Again, wiping most of it off. And I want this blue color closer to the center of the face and the eyes.